at the Alan Turing Institute, our mission is to make great leaps in data science and artificial intelligence research in order to change the world for the better.
This podcast explores the research, ideas and technologies behind the data revolution with the people responsible for shaping our future.
Welcome to the Turing Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Turing Podcast. This episode is from the Turing Podcast archives, recorded early last year, and we're talking about the phenomenon that is Bitcoin. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Turing Podcast. I'm your co-host Ed Calstry, and I'm here with my co-host Rachel Winstanley. Rachel, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Before we introduce our guest today, I just wanted to put a shout out to your new podcast. Rachel was at the Alan Turing Institute for a short period last year and at the start of this year as part of the civil service fast stream. And so she got involved on the podcast, but she's on to better things. So this will be our last episode with us today. Rachel, what are you doing now and what's your new podcast about?
Yeah, so I'm having to leave the Turing podcast because I have made my own podcast called STEM and His Stories, which is all about historical women in STEM and like their contributions to the fields and why those contributions are generally ignored in history and textbooks, which is very fun. But as I've discovered, it's actually a full-time job that I'm doing with another full-time job. So yeah, this will be my last episode, which is quite sad because I've really enjoyed doing this series.
It is a shame. It's been fun having you on. But yeah, I sympathise. We're very fortunate to have our fabulous editor, Dan Whitfield, for this podcast. So those of us who host it don't have to worry about any of that side of things. So I can only imagine that doing both, that will take up quite some of your time. Yeah,
I appreciate Dan a lot more now. I've started doing it myself and I realise how hard it is.
Nice. Well, without further ado, let's introduce today's guest for the podcast. Today we have Dr. Tim Hobson, who is a senior research software engineer at the Alan Turing Institute and who works in my team, which is the research engineering group. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Tim, let's get started before we go on to our topic of the day, which is everything related to Bitcoin and which as we will no doubt soon discover is your passion in life. I just wanted to ask you, how did you come to work at the Alan Turing Institute, and what is your journey through life and science and academia?
Well, I'll try and keep it shortish. So I come from a kind of academic background. I guess I studied electronic engineering and worked as an engineer for a few years. Realized that I always wanted to study. Well, I always knew I wanted to study pure mathematics. So I went back to university and did an undergraduate degree in maths and then a PhD in maths. So I spent a bit too long perhaps at university before entering the workforce. After that, I spent a few years working as a quantitative risk analyst and in the City of London. So I got some exposure to the sort of the financial markets and the risk management sector. And after that, I moved for personal reasons. I moved to Brazil. I lived in Rio for 6 years, and it was there actually that I discovered the existence of the Alan Turing Institute. Reading actually about Bitcoin. Somehow the Turing. I think there was a report by the chief scientific advisor to the UK government that mentioned blockchain and distributed ledgers. And it referred to the Alan Turing Institute several times, and I thought to myself, how come I haven't heard of the Alan Turing Institute? Because it seems to be something that I should have already known about. So I started looking into it and found out they were recruiting, and it was the very early days of the institute at that point. So they had opportunities, and I applied and moved back to England to take up an opportunity, in London at the Turing Institute. So so there's a Bitcoin connection to most aspects of my life these days. So even that one.
So and well done on convincing your wife to move from sunny Rio back to London. That must have been
she did. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can take credit for that, because she actually did her PhD in England, which is why where we met. So she was a Anglophile to some extent already.
Fair enough. Well, so I think we should cover the basics before we go into any depth. So most people listening will, I'm sure, have heard of Bitcoin. It's very much a big thing that's in the news nowadays. But in your own words, Tim, like what is Bitcoin? How did it come about, and what's the point of it?
Okay, that's a simple question. It's not as straightforward. There, No, okay. So what is Bitcoin? There's many. In a sense, it's very easy to explain. I would say that it's a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. So it's a system that runs on a computer network where it's a peer-to-peer system, like some file sharing networks that people will be familiar with. So there's no central sort of authority and control. And it supports this form of social interaction where, instead of sharing files, what people are able to do is they're able to transact. It's essentially a monetary system that is built on a peer-to-peer computer network. The actual sort of technology underlying it is, you could spend months studying and learning about, and indeed. I host a reading group within the Turing Institute, studying the sort of technical aspects. Maybe we'll have time to go into that a little bit, but I think the right way to think of it is as a monetary system that is supported by a distributed computing network that enables that system to function without the need for a central authority to issue and to manage transactions and to issue new units of currency. So it's something like money is a very familiar thing to everybody, I think, but few people, I think, really think about how it works. What's the underlying mechanism? What's the structure of kind of control and management of the system? Not many people really think or worry or understand these things. You don't really need to understand the mechanism that enables Bitcoin to function. But I think you can think of it as just sort of electronic cash. I think that's the right way to think of it. The thing that makes it unusual and interesting, I would say, is not the fact that it's electronic or digital. Most of the cash we use nowadays is digital. We don't use notes much or coins. The thing that's interesting is that there are certain characteristics that arise from the peer-to-peer nature. And by peer-to-peer, I just mean that everyone on the network has equal status. So if you join the Bitcoin network, you're a peer amongst other peers. That you're not subordinate in any sense to some central authority or some other members of the network who are superior, have more control, if you like, over the network than you do. So everyone. So it's a very sort of flat system. In contrast to, I suppose, the traditional monetary system, which is very hierarchical, where you have central banks that issue currency and control the supply through setting interest rates, and then you have commercial banks that are close to the central bank and are licensed to lend money and create units of the currency that way. And then you have the users, if you like, of the system, the customers, who have much less control and much less power than those other sort of central authorities. In Bitcoin, it's very, very flat structure. So people use this term decentralized. So that word refers to, it's not about distribution geographically. It's about where the power resides in the network. And the idea of decentralized system is that the power is spread thinly across all of the participants, and there is no one, central authority or smaller group that is somehow in control. And that characteristic or that property produces an interesting phenomenon, which is that nobody's in control of, for example, the supply, the rate at which money is produced in Bitcoin. It's just fixed. There's a rule for how much Bitcoin can be produced, and no one can change that. So again, that's completely different to the traditional monetary system, where essentially, central banks are in a position of complete control when it comes to how much money actually exists.
Yeah, and remind me of the number of Bitcoins that are in circulation. It's 20, is it 26 million? Did I guess that correctly?
No.
Okay.
So currently there are about just over 18.5 million. But there is a cap. Right. I think what you're thinking of is the supply sort of cap. There's a limit to the number of Bitcoins that will ever be produced, and that's 21 million. So there'll never be more than 21 Bitcoins in existence. And that means that if you own one Bitcoin, then for example, there can only ever be 21 million other people in the world who can eat, can have as much, Bitcoin as you, for example. So that means that it's a very different sort of monetary system, I guess, to the one that we're used to using. And what I find fascinating is the way that this clever sort of trick of which uses some sort of some cryptography, some distributed computer science, some game theory. There's the design of the network and the protocol is very elegant in the way that it solves a 40 or 50-year-old problem in distributed computer science, and it enables this interaction and this participation by anybody in the world. Anyone can join the network and use the network, and yet the rules of the network are respected and have to be respected by all participants without anyone enforcing the rules. And this is really unusual, to find a system that somehow has very strict rules that everyone who enters the system is obliged to conform to and knows in advance, but no one is needed to enforce those rules. So you don't need to trust anyone that those rules will remain in force because that power is distributed across the network, is in this decentralized fashion. Now, to understand exactly how that works, it sounds like magic to me, and that was, I guess, the reason why I took the time to read the white paper, the design paper that was published by creator of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, in 2008, and they
So a he or they, we don't know who it was, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's another interesting aspect, I guess, or intriguing aspect. Something that has become really a big deal was actually invented by, well, we just don't know who, and the pseudonym that was used was Satoshi Nakamoto, but we don't know for sure if it's a he or she or they or a group, or we just don't know. I think that's quite the absence of leadership is somehow nicely reflected in the pseudonymity of the inventor, and that somehow aligns nicely with the lack of leadership or central authority in the network itself.
What's the benefit of having a decentralized version where there isn't a leader compared to traditional? I know we're going to get super into economic stuff, but compared to the traditional bank style, because I know that there's been quite a few instances in the last couple of years, especially where there's been massive bubbles, spikes in the value of Bitcoins, and people have invested and then lost loads of money, or not sold. And whereas obviously if you had like a traditional banking system, you'd have policies like quantitative easing and things to kind of try and mitigate against that. So just, I guess, what's the benefit of having it as decentralized cash?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And inevitably that depends on whether that is a benefit is a controversial sort of question. And there are plenty of people who would say, well, it's not a benefit. It's a flaw. And it creates this sort of price volatility and speculative sort of behavior, and has lots of negative aspects to it. I mean, I would say the advantage is maybe hard. The fundamental advantage is that is something that's not so easy maybe to appreciate in parts of the world where central bank government money is managed more successfully, in that currency debasement or sort of hyperinflation are rare or not remembered in people's lifetimes, and so it's maybe not so obvious to those of us that are fortunate enough to have sort of grown up in a country where the centrally supplied sort of money is sort of functions reasonably, functions pretty well. Maybe it's no coincidence that I came across Bitcoin when I was living in Brazil, and certainly the rate of inflation is much higher there. Although other countries in Latin America suffer far more severely from mismanagement at the sort of central bank level. So it's no coincidence that Bitcoin has been adopted widely in countries like Argentina, in Venezuela. It's currently being used widely, I think, in Turkey and Lebanon, and there are many countries in recent history that have suffered from, if not currency collapses, then severe problems with their sort of domestic currency, and the answer to your question, what's the advantage of no one being in control? That's those people from those countries simply wouldn't need to ask that question. It's immediately obvious to them why no one, or what's the advantage? Because they've suffered from sort of the abuse of the power that comes from being in control of the monetary supply. So I guess one way to look at it would be to say, well, is a global currency a useful thing for humanity? Because at the moment there really isn't one. There's a global reserve currency in the form of the US dollar, which plays an important role in international commerce and trade. Whether or not it's wise or useful to have a particular country also. The currency of a particular country also acting as the global reserve currency, that's also a topic, a debatable subject. But you could argue, well, it would be useful to simply have a global currency that everyone is happy to accept. And then, well, who should be in control of the issuance of that currency? It's unlikely that any particular country could be if you like trusted to play that role, or so how would you choose the authority to control such a thing? Well, one option is to simply say we won't have any authority, and to just say, well, we'll program the issuance rate, and then it's a level playing it's a level playing field in the sense that nobody can then manipulate the supply of the currency for the benefit of some subgroup of the economy, and potentially to the detriment of others. And so I think that's what I would say is the main advantage, is the fact that the rules are known up front and they can't be changed, and everybody who participates does so willingly and without no one's coerced to use Bitcoin. So if you don't want to use it, don't use it. People that do want to use it, I think they see value in the idea that they don't have to trust any central authority not to debase or manipulate or misuse the power that the considerable power that inevitably resides in any institution that is able to print money, let's say.
Is it kind of, just from that description, it kind of almost reminds me of like the role that gold used to play in currency, in that it's not a designed currency that governments or institutes like give a certain value, but it kind of has an inherent value that you can choose to trade for goods and services. And it kind of feels like a digital version of that from your description.
Is the difference there that I guess you can always discover new gold like out there in the world, whereas I suppose with Bitcoin there's a set number of, as you said, Bitcoins that will ever be issued. I don't know if that factors into the difference there.
Yeah, I mean, they're both very, very good points. First of all, Rachel, you're absolutely right. It's a great way to think of it as, sort of bit gold. In fact, there was a proposal that predated Bitcoin called bit gold. It's a term that was used by a guy called Nick Szabo, who wrote some very noteworthy kind of essays, and still does, but wrote about sort of Bitcoin not using that name, but about the consequences and the interest. Many years before Bitcoin was actually invented, he came up with a system called BitGold. So that's exactly the right way to think of it, I think, or it's a very useful kind of conceptual sort of hook. It's very similar to a lot of Bitcoiners are kind of proponents of the sort of the gold standard as essentially they would argue, I think, that it's a superior system to modern sort of fiat currency systems. Again, very controversial subject, and the views on both sides. But certainly, in order to understand Bitcoin, it's a great way to think of it as a kind of a digital commodity, if you like, digital asset that is, it's been designed to sort of to synthetically sort of emulate the properties of gold, but in digital form. But Ed, you're absolutely right that there are certain key differences. It's actually far superior in many ways, I think, to gold. So why did the gold standard break down, or what are the problems that you can have with gold? Well, gold gold has certain properties in common in that it can't be debased, it can't be produced without a lot of hard work in mining to actually sort of get it out of the ground. It's not like a central bank controlled digital central bank controlled sort of fiat currency where there's no real limit to how much can be produced. The one of the problems with gold is that, well, there are several. One is that it's awkward to actually transact with. And so what happened in practice was that people allowed banks to control the actual physical asset, and then the banks would give them notes, essentially IOUs, notes that would be a claim on the gold, and then people would actually do their transactions using these paper notes. And so what you've actually got is a very centralized system again. And
then, of course, you get bank robbers stealing all the gold.
Potentially, yeah, and and you don't know what the bank is necessarily going to do with your gold. They may decide to lend the gold out to someone else, and you're not really in a position to audit that or to have control. I mean, the same exists at nation state level today. There are vaults full of gold in London in particular, but in New York and Zurich and various other locations, and they hold gold on behalf of other nation states. And it has happened in recent history that those that nation states have requested repatriation of gold, and they've not always been. It's not been straightforward to actually get the gold to move from one continent to the nominal owner. So I mean, this is part of the problem. Gold is cumbersome. It's not easy to move across across distances. It's not easily divisible. You can put it in bars and coins, but what if you want to buy a loaf of bread? Well, it's which is why silver ended up being used as a sort of smaller, less valuable asset. there are various sort of shortcomings associated with gold, and Bitcoin goes a long way to fixing these shortcomings. So you can divide them into 100 million units, each of which is called a Satoshi after the inventor. And so although the price of Bitcoin might appear to be very, very high at the moment, it's sort of $30,000 or something for one Bitcoin. Actually, that Bitcoin represents 100 million units of the currency. So for $1, you can get sort of 3,000 Satoshis. So it's very, very divisible. And it's very easy to transmit over distances because you can send it across a communications channel. It's not awkward to transport in the way that gold is, and expensive to store. Or and again, for storage, Bitcoin can be stored very securely using fundamentally, you can write down on a piece of paper, a private key, which which essentially controls hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin if you need to, and you can store that safely, and you can there are sort of techniques to avoid losing or disclosing that that private key, which might result in losing your Bitcoins. It's far easier to manage and to secure and to transport and to divide Bitcoin than it is gold. And there's one other property which is interesting in this respect, which is to actually verify that gold. If someone gives you a gold bar, how do you know that it's actually made of gold? It's called assaying the metal to actually sort of establish that this really is made of gold, and its purity is expensive and difficult. With Bitcoin, you run some open source software on any laptop, and you can see you can verify whether or not a transaction that you received is valid, and therefore that you really are the owner of genuine Bitcoins. And again, this happened recently. There was a large shipment of gold that turned out to actually be tungsten or some sort of base metal, and it was sort of $300 million worth, I think, of gold was discovered. I think it was a port in China. So I mean, these things actually do happen. There are all sorts of aspects of gold that that make it not ideal. So certainly not in 21st century society. So Bitcoin. It's a useful, as I say, a useful sort of conceptual hook to think of it as sort of bit gold, but it's actually a massive step forward in monetary terms as well. One
of the ideas that's been talked about on the podcast previously is we had a guest who you'll be aware of, Tim, Jeff Goodall, who was talking about decentralized and blockchain technology as well. And as you were talking about there, one of the main issues that Bitcoin quote unquote solves, depending on your opinion, is the not having to rely on the central bank or government or whoever issues that currency, being good people and doing right by the consumers. But an additional factor that he mentioned was that it's gone even further than that now. So we used to have physical cash that was issued by the government or the central bank, but what you did with that money was that was up to you, and no one could really know what you were spending your £20 note on. But one of the things that we've traded for convenience in this day and age is the data of our transactions and purchases. So if you spend money with your bank card at a shop or online or anywhere, then someone's keeping track of your transactions, and normally that's the bank that you bank with, but obviously they could be sharing that data. I don't know, but the point is that the data's out there, it's being collected, and it's not fully private in the way that cash was. So in addition to the central authority issuing the currency, you've now got whether it's the central authority or not, or it's one of the the banks that issues your cards. You've got someone tracking what you do with the currency. Whereas I guess Bitcoin comes in and eliminates both of those, whilst also keeping at least hopefully keeping the convenience of not having to have physical money. And but yeah, I don't know if that's 100% true, because then how convenient is it to spend Bitcoin on stuff at the moment? That's an interesting question.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a few interesting sort of points that you touched on there. So I would definitely, So it is kind of counterintuitive, and that an open system like Bitcoin, where I mean, the distributed ledger, the blockchain that everyone is sort of fascinated by. That is a list of all transactions that have ever taken place in the Bitcoin system. And so, in that sense, it's far more transparent than the standard, or the traditional, sort of banking system. And so you could say that, well, it's the kind of the privacy, sort of the question of privacy and anonymity are actually are big, big sort of flaw or problem in Bitcoin. So. It's a very different equation, I think, to the current system.
That's really interesting, actually. But does anyone know? Okay, there's a user that has all of that transaction information, but do they know that it's you? Is it or maybe it is possible to work out that it's you? I don't know.
There are companies that do this that attempt to link transactions together and to link addresses with identities of individuals or groups. There are these chain analysis companies that try to kind of that mine the information included in the blockchain to try to sort of track behavior. And so that does exist. There are ways, there are techniques to avoid, for users who don't want to be tracked and who want to remain sort of private. There are well-known techniques to sort of to mitigate this kind of tracking. It's not possible on the face of it it's not immediately obvious who the users are, the sort of humans who are controlling the funds, and because there's just a string, a long string of characters, which is a Bitcoin address, and so that this address has a certain number of coins associated with it, but you don't know, who's actually in control of that. I mean, if you use Bitcoin naively, then you can quite easily allow your identity to become associated with the Bitcoin addresses that you use. For example, I mean, even simply by you might be, if you own if you have some Bitcoins, then you might say, well, okay, I'll use what's called a blockchain explorer, which is a way of just it's a kind of usually a web application that enables you to sort of say to look at what the state of the blockchain, and you could type in your address or copy and paste your Bitcoin address into that explorer, and then it will show you what funds are associated with that address and what transactions have taken place. But in doing so, you're disclosing to whoever's hosting that blockchain explorer, that application, you're exposing the fact that you're interested in that particular address. Now, you might just take an interest for no particular reason, or it might imply that you're actually the owner of those funds. So you can leak information quite easily. But you can avoid that, for example, by running your own full Bitcoin node, and then you can use your own node as a blockchain explorer, and verify your own funds that way, and everybody else's, if you like, but only, as I say, pseudonymously, if you like. The Bitcoin addresses basically become pseudonyms for the users. So there are all sorts of techniques to preserve privacy. I mean, so there's. I think you're right that these that central, the authorities, whether they are card issuers or central banks, the issue of sort of privacy and control over your own funds is becoming more and more kind of more and more important topic. And I think, this is, so there's a few misconceptions around Bitcoin. And one of them, I think, is this idea that, central banks are going to begin issuing their own digital currencies. So central bank digital currencies, it's a hot topic that the Chinese government is working on one. So is the European Central Bank. The Federal Reserve in the United States have talked recently about this, and sometimes it's suggested that Bitcoin will become sort of obsolete once the central banks have their own digital currency, and then Bitcoin will be some kind of a sort of quaint relic of a period of transition. But when you look at the characteristics of Bitcoin, you actually realize that it's on the exact opposite end of the spectrum to central bank digital currencies, because for partly for the reason you just mentioned, Ed. In terms of surveillance, central bank digital currency will give complete control, not only to knowledge of how individuals are spending, but also control over what they're allowed to spend their funds on. I mean, any transaction in a central bank digital currency certainly will be. I mean, the word central bank digital currency, the C stands for central, as in it's the opposite of Bitcoin, right? So in Bitcoin, it's a decentralized system where nobody can intervene and censor a transaction. So it's if Ed, you want to send me a Bitcoin, or you want to send a Bitcoin to someone in a different country, or potentially in a country against which there are sanctions, it would be very difficult maybe to conduct that transaction using the traditional banking system, but you could trivially perform it using Bitcoin. You can simply just broadcast your transaction. It's just a Bitcoin transaction, and it's really interesting characteristic or property of the network that no authority is able to stop that. So your funds, if you own Bitcoin, your funds cannot be frozen, they cannot be censored, or transactions cannot be blocked or stopped or undone by any central authority. Which is, I mean, again, this is one of the aspects that's arguably it's certainly it's not necessarily a positive or a negative. I mean, it's something quite controversial potentially, whether or not this is a good thing or not. But it's just a fact. It's a very stark and interesting fact of the system that users have ultimate control over how they transact, and no authority is powerful enough to actually stop transactions from taking place. And again, going back to central bank digital currencies, it would be trivial for a central bank.
Well, I was going to ask Tim, what would be the point of them making such a thing? Like, how would that be better for them than just using the existing national currency? Why would they make a blockchain-based system at all? I certainly can't see any reason why they would use a blockchain, because the blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, that piece of technology was invented in order to solve the problem of wanting to have a peer-to-peer network with no central authority, right.
And still enforce, but still be able to agree on the rules and to achieve a consensus across the network over what transactions have actually taken place. And that's not an easy problem to solve. And the Bitcoin blockchain, the invention of that technology was all about enabling consensus to be achieved across a network without a central authority. If you have a central authority anyway, because it's a central bank digital currency, then the last the last thing in the world you want is a blockchain. It's completely useless and extremely inefficient way to run a system if you're going to have a central authority.
Are the digital currencies that they might be proposing then, do they not use blockchain? And if they don't, then but still the question is, I'm not sure what's the difference then between what they're proposing and when we already have digital versions of the regular currency.
I confess that I don't know the technical details. I don't think they've been published yet, or if they will be, maybe they'll. I doubt there'll be open source, free and open source software in the way that Bitcoin is. So it's hard to speculate about exactly how technically they'll operate. I don't see that there's a great deal of advantage from the user's perspective, because the characteristics, the properties of Bitcoin that make it interesting, which is the supply cap.
The 21 million.
Exactly. The limit on the amount of issuance that's possible, which means that people, the currency can't be debased, and the resistance to censorship and the kind of what's sometimes referred to as self-sovereignty, as in the power being actually held by the user and then being able to hold their own private keys and transact without asking permission from anybody. These properties simply are not present in a central bank digital currency, and in fact, it would be the exact inverse, I think, from that perspective. So I suppose that the central bank has perceived some benefits from their perspective. I don't see a great advantage to the user, just because we already have the convenience of digital currencies.
Exactly.
Do you think it's part of that thing, or I feel like there's a thing at the moment where blockchain and digital currencies is kind of trendy? Like a couple of years ago, before I was on the fast stream, I was working for this private company, and then there was a period where suddenly I was like, we're going to utilize blockchain technology. And sort of like, but why would that work here, and how are you going to utilize that to do clean energy stuff? And same with digital currencies, it kind of feels like it's the trendy, in the same way, I guess, that, I don't know, 10 years ago, everyone was like the cloud, and everyone was like blockchain, without necessarily thinking about how useful it is as a piece of technology in and of itself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Rachel. And I think I'm in the minority in this, in taking this position. But that's absolutely my take on it. For the very specific purpose of producing a decentralized peer-to-peer electronic cash system, the blockchain turns out to be a really, really clever, as I say, very elegant solution. But it works because of a whole kind of package of incentives and design features that were very cleverly and carefully constructed to produce the outcome that the designer was looking for. The idea that you can just transplant this blockchain technology and do lots of other useful things with it and tweak it and change the consensus mechanism and still preserve the kind of the security and and the trustworthy aspects of Bitcoin. I don't buy it. A lot of these attempts to use blockchain more for other applications have they've either just fallen away and failed, essentially, or they've mutated into very different systems that don't really use a blockchain. I don't think the blockchain is a generally applicable technology that you can use for all sorts of other things like supply chain management and this sort of thing. I just don't see the benefit, because it's very rare that you want or that you need to have a complete decentralization of power. As soon as you've got any centralized sort of authority, then it's much, much more efficient to just use a shared database, which might use some cryptographic tools for verifying consistency or veracity of information. But that's not a blockchain. A blockchain that at least the Bitcoin blockchain is very specifically for enables this consensus to be reached across a large network of participants who don't know or trust each other, but still want to cooperate and agree on essentially who owns what, how much is in each of their bank accounts, and it is a really amazing solution and technology, because I still find it incredible that you can have a monetary system where everyone sort of everyone agrees that agrees on how much money everyone's got. No one is able to cheat. Everyone can transact. They don't have to trust each other. It actually works, but nobody's in control, and it's just a very special thing that Satoshi invented. But the other uses of blockchain, I haven't seen a single one that stands up to that really kind of passes the test of when you look at the engineering trade-offs. I mean, blockchains are very, very inefficient.
This is the problem with the mining and how much energy that uses, right?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say a problem, but yeah, it's a feature that in order to process relatively few transactions per second, if you like, a lot of electricity is used by the Bitcoin network, but the reason it uses so much energy is not because electricity is not because the processing of the transactions is not the expensive part. The expensive part is the proof of work, which is used to demonstrate that across a network where you don't trust other participants, that that those other participants have been following the rules, and that they've proof of work enables someone to it really is a proof you can verify regardless without having to know who your counterparty is, if you like. You can verify that they've actually performed many computations in order to produce the cryptographic hash which satisfies the difficulty requirement and is a valid block of bitcoins, and therefore they deserve the reward of the new bitcoins produced in that block. I'm sorry, I know the technical side we haven't got time to go into, so what I just said won't make sense if you don't really understand how the system works.
But essentially, that's the mining process you've just described, and it's essential for the network to function, but because it requires a lot of computing power, those people who have the computers that do that work then get some reward from doing it as an incentive to do it.
Yes, you've summed it up better than me. But I think, again, one of the misconceptions is that actually because they're essentially doing work for the sake of doing work, that somehow this is wasteful. But actually, the whole system depends on that. That's how the system works. So they're not wasting that energy. What they're using that electrical energy to support and to enable a global monetary system to function, and it's a sound monetary system in the sense that nobody can debase it, and and the societal benefit of that system is considerable, to put it mildly, particularly if you're unlucky enough to live in a country where you can't rely on your own domestic currency. So yeah, the idea that somehow it's wasteful, I would question fundamentally, but it's certainly inefficient from a kind of a software engineering sort of throughput and a kind of the sort of the amount of information that is being processed by the database and the system. It's inefficient. So if you're going to have a central authority, then you can build a much more efficient system and avoid that use, that large scale use of electrical energy. So I think that's a difficult concept maybe to really to get your head around, perhaps, or at least, well, a lot of people seem to be enamored with this idea of using a blockchain all over the place. But it is extremely inefficient. But you're trading off that inefficiency in terms of energy use for something which is worth even more than the electrical energy you put in. And otherwise people wouldn't bother, right? The only reason that miners can, they're doing it voluntarily. Bitcoin miners mine Bitcoins because it's profitable to them. They decided they want to do it. Why is it profitable? It's profitable because the Bitcoins that they mine, that are produced, that they receive as a reward, and the fees they receive as a reward are valuable. Well, why are they valuable? Well, because people want to hold Bitcoins. People find Bitcoins valuable and useful. And so, there is a closed loop here where the energy is being used to provide massive utility globally to lots and lots of participants on the network.
No, it's a great point, and it's a great comeback to that. That it does seem to be the aspect of Bitcoin that's often being commented on in the news media at the moment. I wanted to ask you about something you mentioned earlier, which is that you were just talking about your skepticism about other uses of blockchain. And Rachel was also mentioning about things being in vogue and how like hype, can lead to a technology being perhaps used when it wasn't necessarily the right tool for the job. So the other thing that seems to be in fashion for blockchain at the moment are these NFTs or non-fungible tokens, which have apparently taken the art world by storm and have other purposes, I believe, in music and other things, where people have produced some kind of one-of-a-kind thing. So unlike Bitcoin, where it's a currency which is fungible, which one Bitcoin equals someone else's one Bitcoin, for the system where there are unique items, this is supposedly the blockchain-based system that works for them. I don't know how well I've explained that. I don't know if I fully understand the system myself, but what are your opinions on that, given that you've just expressed so much skepticism over other uses of blockchain beyond Bitcoin?
Yeah, I'm afraid to say I'm extremely skeptical of NFTs as well. I mean, these similar things have existed before. In 2017, there was a craze called crypto kitties, which were essentially non-fungible tokens, where sort of they had sort of cat sort of emojis and icons on I don't know, some sort of tokens and different sort of cat personalities, and some became some were traded for vast sums of money. So I mean, that's a non-fungible token. I think now there's a new take on it, whereby somehow the artist sort of there's some metadata. So there's some metadata associated with the token that comes directly from the artist, and that makes it more valuable somehow. Although I think that metadata ends up getting written to IPFS, which is the interplanetary file system, and if it's not preserved, then that can actually disappear over time if it's not if people stop running the software or the servers that were actually holding the metadata, they can go offline, and that has happened in the case of NFTs. So exactly what you're buying is really quite hard to I can't see the value in it, frankly. I mean, you're essentially getting a digital image or file of some sort, together with some metadata. But I mean, none of these things are really unique. In the way that in the way that I would say a sort of a Bitcoin is a thing that you can use uniquely, and no one else can hold it at the same time as you're holding it. I mean, I consider NFTs a kind of another one of these craze that is going to probably die out quite quickly. I think the hype seems to have already started to die down on NFTs. There'll be other ones in the future, no doubt. I'm unconvinced, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Because I think, because me and Ed were talking about this the other day, because I was coming at it from a different perspective of like, I guess from the artist's perspective of like saying that there is an inherent value, I guess, in having a digital piece of art and some metadata behind it, just because it's the message, like the thing from the artist, as opposed to something that could be copied. But then I guess that's the same as saying like, you could buy a Rothko painting, or you could buy an exact duplicate of a Rothko painting that's not by Rothko and is worth no money, and the Rothko is worth however many millions of pounds. The only difference being that one is authentically done by the artist in the name, and one is done by someone who's trying to mimic that person. But as I was talking about the fact that in the digital world, it's much harder for creatives and artists to make money. So like, you know, if you look at something like Spotify, where you barely get paid, and then you have instances like Taylor Swift, for example, whose entire back catalogue of music was owned by her record label, and then they sold the rights to it, and she doesn't own the fundamental rights to that. But something like an NFT type situation means that you can own and sell the original version of that and still profit from that in a digital sphere in a way that otherwise you can't as a creative. So, for example, people who make digital art, which is like becoming more and more common, it's a way for you to do that and make money from it, as opposed to it being something that is taken for free by multiple people. So I guess I'm not saying that NFTs in its current form is like the right solution using blockchain and in its current design, but I think there's an argument to having a system that allows creative people to operate in a digital environment.
Yeah, maybe this will, although even if the system itself as it exists ends up being a hype, maybe it will be something that precedes a more, you know, well thought out system for this exact kind of use case, really, because it's clearly meeting a need. That's why so many people are keen on it all of a sudden. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I don't know. Yeah, I'm torn between the two of you, because I do see it as something that could be potentially very valuable, but there are so many things that it relies on at the moment, like that people carry on using it and continue to recognize those tokens as being ownership in some way. I think that, you know, the problem, and maybe Bitcoin to a certain extent has this problem as well, but it's overcome because it's just become so popular, is that if you technically own an NFT, right? Well, in what sense do you own it? You don't own it in a country's legal authority. You just own it according to the NFT system, or I think it's Ethereum, the network it runs on. And then I guess maybe I could put the same question to Bitcoin in, like, if I have a Bitcoin wallet, I mean, I can use it, but I guess what is ownership? It's almost a philosophical question. Like, is ownership, you know, does it have to be in the legal authority of the country you live in that they say that you own something, or is it just the fact that you can use something? I don't know. It's complex, I guess.
Yeah, I think in the case of Bitcoin, I'm comfortable with the idea that if you have the private key, which is needed to sign a transaction to transfer Bitcoins across the network, then, you know, that is ownership of those coins. I suppose in NFTs work similarly, but the private key would enable you to transfer ownership of the token, which somehow represents the digital, you know, art, or at least the metadata. You know, it's a different type of collectible. I suppose people do like to collect stuff, and so if that makes them happy, then and maybe it will go. It seems very potentially much more sort of speculative, because you're hoping that that somehow ownership of this token. is somehow valuable. I think the fundamentals of, I keep coming back to the idea that money is a very important thing in society, right? It's a kind of taboo subject, and that's part of the reason people don't really understand how it works. And but the actual technological side of it, I don't think should be sort of taboo or kind of a subject that we don't understand. It's an important thing in everybody's life. So I think having an upgrade to the monetary system, as a piece of better technology that didn't exist a decade and a half ago, then that seems to me, that's of interest. Having a new type of collectible where you can kind of, you can sort of, essentially you can look in a blockchain explorer and just verify that, associated with an address that you control, there is this piece of metadata, but that the actual data contained is shared by other people, that everyone knows. There's nothing that you sort of that or that you have access to that nobody else does, except just to transfer that token. So this is, in that sense, Bitcoin is no more it's no more but except that there's a network effect associated with a new monetary system that's actually going to take off, right? So this is an important point as well, that we've never seen a synthetic asset just become monetized, become adopted by humanity as a better form of money. Whether or not that is the trajectory that Bitcoin is going to continue to kind of follow, is unclear, but it is possible, and it looks to be going along that trajectory. If it does, then it brings with it some societal benefits. I think I can't really see the benefit of other collectible systems. And this raises the question of altcoins. Why is Bitcoin? I would consider Bitcoin of interest, and the thousands of altcoins, which are other digital currencies that are more or less similar to Bitcoin, but have some different properties, but pretend to, if you like, to be similar or equivalent. I think Bitcoin is interesting and superior because it's actually secure and genuinely decentralized, because of the way that it grew organically over many years, whereas altcoins are essentially centralized. So they might appear to be similar, and they might profess to be decentralized, and therefore, if you like, an equivalent or even better than Bitcoin. But actually, when you look closely, you discover that there are very few nodes on the network, right, or that there are very, very few mining nodes, or for whatever reason, there is inevitably there's a controlling group or entity which sort of takes an interest in promoting that coin.
I guess there's a self-reinforcing aspect to Bitcoin's growth, and the fact that it was the first as well helps with that, in that if you are it's more worth your time to set up a Bitcoin node, right, or to do mining, because I suppose is it worth more than the others? But it's, even if it's not worth more, it's just a bigger network and more likely to exist in the future, and so on.
Yeah, I think it genuinely is an attempt to sort of upgrade the global monetary system, which sounds a bit grandiose and certainly sort of raised eyebrows and curled lips a few years ago when I used to talk like this. But nowadays people take it far more seriously, and I think it's arguably a genuine attempt to do that, to essentially separate money and state, and to produce a monetary system that's not governed, if you like, in the traditional way. I don't think any of the other systems can pretend to have that that aim. There's no realistic chance of that happening with any of the other systems, because they are far less decentralized, or they haven't been tested in the way that Bitcoin has. just don't have sufficient network effect. And so, yeah, I mean, short term, you might, speculating in altcoins or mining altcoins might be more profitable, but the kind of medium long term goal is I can't see any justification or explanation for what the eventual aim is. Whereas with Bitcoin, it seems to me that it's a genuine attempt to move to a different form of money.
I kind of agree. I think that, obviously, as you said, back in 2008 or whenever it was when you read the initial white paper write-up of the purpose of Bitcoin, that's what the intention was. Whereas now, and this has happened obviously with Bitcoin as well, but is really the purpose of a lot of these other coins, which is just that they're an asset which has a value that can be inflated very quickly by lots of people buying it, and then can be deflated when people sell it. And so it's just an investment opportunity like any other, apart from, I guess, the people who make these things can also profit by just making them in the first place. And I guess you'd be tempted to say that some of them are probably scams, especially if they really don't have any other actual purpose, other than just to hope that the value goes up for a bit and then the people holding it can sell it. I don't know if that's too cynical of a take, but
I would tend to agree and say I would say the vast majority are scams to some, for want of a better word. I mean, I'm all in favour of innovation, of course. It's great if people think that that they can do new stuff that is not possible, with Bitcoin, say. But I do think that if it's quite easy to miss the subtleties of the kind of the engineering sort of trade-offs that are important, and you can kind of come up with a system which where I mean, decentralization itself is a difficult thing to quantify and to measure. And it's not sort of binary. It's not sort of one system is centralized, another is decentralized. It's a spectrum, and establishing the sufficient degree of decentralization to support the use case that you have in mind is difficult to do that, or to even sort of explain what you mean by, or to sort of quantify what decentralize, how much decentralization is needed or is important or is sufficient. I mean, one of the next biggest blockchain after Bitcoin is called Ethereum, which is at least a novel sort of idea, in that the scripting language in Ethereum is Turing complete. So the idea is that you can write arbitrarily complicated, or at least you can write arbitrary scripts. Smart contracts, they're called, so that you essentially got money which is programmable, and you can build applications that move funds around.
Can you remind us what is meant by Turing complete? If we're on the Turing podcast, we should probably explain that.
It essentially means that any logic, business logic that you want your program to encompass can be encoded in the language that you're using. So a programming language is Turing complete if you can write, you can encode an arbitrary, set of instructions in that language. Now, Bitcoin script, the scripting language in Bitcoin is deliberately not Turing complete. Basically, the right way to think of it is that that there are no loops in. So anyone who's familiar with computer programming will be familiar with the idea of loops or iteration. So there's no looping construct in the Bitcoin scripting language, and this is quite deliberate, but because potentially you can attack the system. You could attack the system by writing maybe, say, an infinite loop, which which must be processed by all the nodes on the network, and then they would simultaneously all fall over and fail to complete the processing of a given transaction, and that would sort of render the system unusable.
So what you're saying in essence is that Ethereum is easier to hack than Bitcoin, just by virtue of the fact that it could run any code if you wrote it in the correct language.
Certainly, the attack surface is far wider. I don't want to pretend that they didn't recognize this issue sometimes talk. You probably may have heard of the halting problem. It's not possible given the code of a computing of a computer program to determine whether or not it's going to kind of complete in a finite amount of time. So this is well known, and the designers of the Ethereum system took this into account. They came up with this idea of having a second form of token, or which they called gas, which was kind of the fuel used when processing smart contracts, and so every line, every instruction, every line of code that's executed uses up a certain amount of gas, and you have to use Ether, the token, the native token of the network. You have to use that to buy gas, and so essentially your smart contracts can only run for as long as you've got gas to pay for them. So which is quite a clever idea. In principle, this is an interesting idea. It turns out that in practice, Ethereum has essentially sort of failed to scale and to operate as intended, to the extent that it is now being redesigned. So there's a second sort of iteration of the Ethereum network, which is, and they've long intended to move away from proof of work, which is the consensus mechanism used in Bitcoin, to an alternative called proof of stake, which is supposed to be more efficient and gets around the problem or the issue of energy usage, which concerns many. The problem is that there's no working. There's no really good evidence that this system actually works. So, one great thing about Bitcoin is that it actually works. No one questions whether or not, as a system, it actually functions according to its design. It seems to function very, very successfully. Ethereum, it remains to be seen whether or not they can pull it off. At least there's some genuine novelty that distinguishes it from Bitcoin. I think whether or not we want to attach the label, I wouldn't want to sort of attach labels to Ethereum that maybe some other altcoins deserve. I'm skeptical, to be honest, of Ethereum. Just in its, I think there are fundamental problems with proof of stake as a consensus mechanism, and I don't think, I don't think. Well, I remain to be convinced that they can solve. I don't think there is a solution if the problems are as fundamental as has been suggested. But we're
early days from the sounds of it. Yeah. Tim, before we start to wrap up, I just want to ask you a bit about the Bitcoin reading group at the Alan Turing Institute. We have at work, being a research institute, a lot of different interests floating amongst the team and the wider institute in various aspects of technology. And from time to time, someone proposes a reading group, which may or may not involve a lot of background reading, depending on the topic. But generally, it will involve, just getting together once a week or once a fortnight or something, and chatting over a topic or a book or something. And seeing as how Bitcoin is your area of interest and something that you think about a lot, you've obviously started up the Bitcoin reading group. Now, we mentioned earlier about having a Bitcoin node is in of itself useful. And I believe that one of the things you've done as part of the group is to set up a Bitcoin node. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that and what else you've been up to in the group.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I set up a reading group a couple of years ago, partly just to give me an excuse to talk about Bitcoin with colleagues, but also because the Turing Institute has different research programs, and blockchain technology and distributed ledgers have been raised as interesting sort of research topics in a variety of those. So I felt that it was important that there was some expertise within the research engineering group, so that we could make judgments and we can reason about this technology in a way that's not superficial, and hopefully cut through the hype and some of the misconceptions. So there was a kind of a serious side to it, as well as a kind of a fun side for me personally. We have looked at lots of different aspects of Bitcoin. We have also, as you say, installed a full node on a cloud server, and to a certain extent we've used that to mine information from the blockchain, just to see there's a huge quantity of data that is potentially of interest. There's a lot of analysis that you can perform by having access to that data.
What kind of analysis?
Well, I mean, one thing we've looked at is one interesting feature of the, as we mentioned about the 21 million supply cap. Well, something that is maybe not quite so widely known is that the rate at which Bitcoins are produced actually is not constant. So it's constant during for 4-year intervals, and then approximately 4-year intervals, and then the rate of supply halves every 4 years, more or less. Or every certain number, I think it's every 210,000 blocks, which approximates to a 4-year period. So right now, every block, new Bitcoin block that's mined, which happens about every 10 minutes, each new block contains 6.25 new Bitcoins. Up until about a year and a half ago, I think that was 12 and a half, so twice as much. Before that, it was 25. And when the Bitcoin, the first block was mined and the system began, it was 50 coins were produced every block. So this is an interesting sort of supply schedule, and it creates some interesting economic effects, because essentially the group of people that are using Bitcoin and demanding it as an asset, as a financial asset, is basically increasing over time. You can see from the number of nodes and the user base is there's continual kind of adoption of by new users. But every 4 years, the supply of this asset is, or at least the rate of issuance of the asset is halved. And so, you don't have to have a PhD in economics to kind of understand that supply shock is going to have an effect on the price. The only thing that can, that's not, if you can't control the supply, then and the price floats freely against other currencies, then you would expect demand is generally increasing with user adoption going up, and then every 4 years the supply the rate of issuance halves. You would expect that supply shock to result in an increase in the price, and that's precisely what I think drives these what end up being kind of speculative bubble phases, where the price shoots up very rapidly, and then followed by a correction, and then a longer period of sort of consolidation at a new price level. And there's actually a mathematical model that basically that explains, or at least attempts to sort of quantify this effect. It's called the stock-to-flow model. It's produced by a Scandinavian guy who's a quantitative analyst. He also prefers to remain pseudonymous, I think. But if you search for the stock-to-flow model and Bitcoin, then you'll find that he essentially performed a simple linear regression by looking at the log of the market capitalization of Bitcoin, so the total value of all the coins in existence, against the log of what's called the stock-to-flow ratio, which is the stock being the amount of Bitcoins that have already been mined, and the flow being the new issuance of Bitcoins. So this stock-to-flow ratio, is essentially, is close to constant during most periods, but then when the issuance halves, it suddenly changes and goes up to a new kind of. So it looks like a step function. Basically, it jumps up to a new level. And so by regressing these two quantities against each other, it was found that there's a very sort of obvious linear relationship between these two quantities. So it's a simple econometric model that just appears to, and it was produced a couple of years ago, and it still appears to essentially have good predictive power. So it's.
Did you take a look at just to check it out, basically see if it was accurate?
Yeah. So one thing that you can do by running your own node is you've got access to the number of coins that are in existence, and so you can calculate for yourself the stock-to-flow ratio. You need to acquire the price or the valuation data elsewhere, but there are lots of Bitcoin exchanges from which you can download that information. Yeah. So one thing we've done in the reading group is actually is try to reproduce that that model. It's a bit of sort of it's relatively simple piece of data science, but it's kind of interesting in that it appears to something that's usually very, very difficult to predict, appears to actually follow quite closely the predictions of this model. So it's interesting in its simplicity and its kind of predictive, or its successful predictive power to date.
Well, I mean, it sounds like without offering any investment advice whatsoever, it sounds like it's worth holding.
I certainly don't want to pretend that I'm. You could put it that way. I mean, one other thing is worth mentioning. The thing to do with the reading group, we're currently actually studying the Lightning Network, the Bitcoin Lightning Network. So I must quickly plug the Lightning Network as a really interesting piece of technology that's built on top of Bitcoin and is only possible because of the underlying Bitcoin network. So the Lightning Network is a payment layer for Bitcoin. So it's well known that Bitcoin is only the throughput, the transaction throughput for that Bitcoin can support is relatively small. It only about 6 or 7 transactions per second can be processed, and in practice it's more like 2 or 3. And that's often held up as a criticism that Bitcoin, again, it uses all this electricity, and yet it's only able to process this small number of transactions, whereas something like Visa processes many thousands of transactions per second. I'd just like to kind of, maybe one final sort of misconception that I'd quite like to kind of address. I mean, these two things are not equivalent. You're not comparing like with like there, because the Visa network is a payments network, whereas the Bitcoin network is it's a monetary system and a settlement network.
Is this Bitcoin Lightning essentially looking to address that exact problem then by allowing you to transact in Bitcoin quickly?
Precisely, not only quickly, but with much lower fees, and so quickly in the sense that the payments are settled essentially instantaneously. And also, there's no real limit to the number of transactions per second that can be processed by the network, because actually, the Lightning Network is not a broadcast network in the way that Bitcoin is, which is obviously inefficient because everybody has to process everybody else's transactions. Within Lightning, you're able to actually have a bilateral sort of transaction, and you have what are called payment channels, bidirectional payment channels between kind of individual nodes, and the information about transactions across those channels doesn't need to be processed by everybody else. So it's far more efficient, and it's a payment layer, but it's only possible to have Lightning payments. They're only possible in a trustless or trust minimized way, because of the underlying Bitcoin blockchain, which kind of acts as a kind of objective and honest sort of judge in any dispute over transactions on the layer above. So this idea of building layers on top of Bitcoin to perform more efficient transactions. So, for example, just to compare with, instead of altcoins or centralized systems that can be more efficient, what you can actually do is build protocols and networks on top of the Bitcoin layer, enabling people to get the benefits of the hard asset, which is Bitcoin, but also get the benefits of efficient payments and much higher throughput. So that's the current subject that we're studying, and it's I think it's about to become more widely known, given that Bitcoin is now becoming sort of more ubiquitous and more widely adopted, even to the extent that recently El Salvador announced that Bitcoin would become legal tender in that country, and therefore you'll be able to use Bitcoin for any transaction you like in El Salvador. And that really is only possible, I think, because of the Lightning network. Otherwise, just the fees and the sort of the rate at which transactions settle and finalize.
You'd never have the convenience of a Visa or MasterCard without this additional layer.
Exactly. It makes it cheap and quick and easy to transact in small amounts.
So in El Salvador, or in the future here, are we going to have Bitcoin Lightning cards in our wallets or something? Is that how it's going to go?
They'll be on your phone. I mean, you can just put a Lightning wallet on your phone now, and use it. I think they'll also be embedded in web browsers. I think there'll be web services where payments are needed. For example, for streaming content, we talked earlier a little bit about artists. Needing to be able to monetize their content and their material. One possible solution that avoids subscriptions or ads or central distributors who might take a cut or make it or basically stand in between middlemen in between the consumer and the artist. Potentially the Lightning network also and Bitcoin micropayments that are facilitated by the Lightning network. That's another possible model for solving that problem, whereby you would stream content rather than making a monthly payment, to subscribe to Spotify, for example. You could simply stream Satoshis every second, for example, that you're listening to a stream, an audio stream or a video stream, and in that way, the artist gets compensated, for every streaming event that takes place. So that I think that's an interesting possible kind of future model for monetizing sort of artistic content.
Well, I think that nicely brings us full circle. Tim, it's been really great chatting to you about all this stuff, and before we let you go, let's just ask, are you the sort of person that has social media, or if not, where can people find more about you and the things you do online?
I'd say I keep quite a low profile on social media. So I mean I have a page, I guess, on the Turing Institute website, and I'm always keen to hear from people. If anyone's got any sort of feedback, they'll find my contact details there, and they can certainly reach out to me. As I say, I'm not really. I guess I'm an introvert to a certain extent.
I think being a fan of decentralized and non-centralized technology lends itself to having social media accounts, in my experience. But that's another rabbit hole, so we probably shouldn't go down that one. All right, thanks for coming on, Tim. Cheers.
Thanks so much for having me, Ed and Rachel. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
If you have an interesting topic you'd like featured on the show, a guest recommendation or a burning question, email podcast@turing.ac.uk.
The Turing Podcast is hosted by Ed Cowstream, B. Costa Gomez and Joe Dungate, and produced by Dan Whitfield for the Alan Turing Institute.
Music for the podcast was provided by Jam and Sun. You can check out his latest releases at jamandsun.bandcamp.com.